John McMullen at the NovaCare Complex today. He's got news and notes on our website, 973ESPN.com. Some interesting injury news today coming from the NovaCare Complex. A couple names that you're going to hear about. Also, some updates on some previously injured Eagles. We'll get into all that and more, plus our NFL news and notes. NFL columnist, FanRag Sports NFL, and Eagles insider for 97.3 ESPN.com. John McMullen is with us here on the Bash Wednesday show. This is kind of the look ahead to the Arizona Cardinals, John, but some interesting storylines coming out today. Give us a little update on some of the injured birds, Fletcher Cox, Ronald Darby at the top of that list.
Yeah, I mean, Fletcher, it's the same as we've heard day to day. They're not changing their talk around him, but obviously he didn't practice. I think I heard, we heard last week that the injury would probably be a 2-week one. So things are not trending in a positive direction for him this week at least, but we'll see. It's still early, and he's a veteran player, so you don't necessarily need to be out there on Wednesday, which is the most important practice day of the week. As far as Ronald Darby, I think the Eagles are targeting the Washington Redskins, which is ironic because that's how he got hurt in the season opener against the Redskins. That would be on Monday Night Football, October 23rd, I believe. Remember, they have a short week after Arizona. They play Thursday night. So it looks like he's not going to be able to get back for that game, and they're hopeful after sort of a mini bye week he'll be able to be back. And Tim Jernigan would be the couple of surprise injuries. I have to add Wendell Smallwood to that. And that to me is a bigger concern because Wendell has had issues staying healthy, and now he's got a larger role. He's touching the football more. He's on the field more, and he's injured, and he's not able to practice on Wednesday. So that one is something you'll have to keep an eye on as the week goes on. As far as Jernigan, he was out with a heel contusion, but Doug said he will play on Sunday, so that's not as big a concern.
Yeah, a lot there, and obviously Smallwood, he's been, is it fair to say that this is kind of going old school Eagles with the three-headed monster look? Are we going to see these guys? I mean, last week you had 10 carries for Clement, 10 carries for the third running back. That would obviously amp his workload up if Smallwood couldn't go. But if you have Clement and Blunt, you'd be interesting to see how they split those two guys up as opposed to having Smallwood. So he's the guy that gives them a little something different.
Yeah, he is, and he's really in the Darren Sproles role now as the third down back because they think he's a better pass receiver. They think he's improved his pass protection at least to a bit. And I think, as good as LeGarrette Blount was against the Chargers, and he was terrific, I think it says a lot that they still didn't give him the ball and feed him the ball a ton. So I think it's evident that's the limit as far as LeGarrette Blount, as far as repetitions, as far as carrying the football, unless an injury happens. As you mentioned, if, for instance, Wendell Smallwood's not able to go, well, I doubt they're just going to put Kenyon Varner in that role. He's just been back for over a week, so you would almost have to increase the workload of both Blunt and Clement. But it's pretty clear if those three guys are healthy, yeah, it's going to be the three-headed monster, as you mentioned.
All right, John McMullen's with us here. Darby's interesting. How do you anticipate this secondary kind of looking when he's back? I mean, crowded house back there. I mean, a good problem to have, but what do you think? Who's the odd man out when Darby is back?
Yeah, I think Rasul Douglas is the odd man out, and that's just a situation where he's playing. That's what the NFL is. It's sort of a war of attrition, and you have to have that next man up mentality. But once Ronald Darby comes back and once he's healthy, he's by far the best cornerback on this team. He will assume his role. You have Jalen Mills on the opposite side, and Patrick Robinson is just playing too well in the slot to take him off the football field. So if everyone's healthy, that's the way the Eagles are going to go once Darby is back.
John, ever since we had that conversation about the Eagles running the football, they've been running the football, Do you think it's more the product that they faced two teams that kind of struggled versus the run, or is Doug really ready to be a balanced offense?
No, I've never wavered. I said this when they weren't running the ball. I said it when they were running the ball. It's the personality of each individual game. The Eagles have been in the lead for the most part over the last 2 weeks, and they've been successful running the football. So if that turns on its head, like it was in Kansas City, and you're down 14 points in the second half, well, the pass-run ratio is going to get blown up again, and it's going to heavily tilt towards the pass. So it has a lot to do with the personality of the game and the fact that the Eagles have been so successful running the football. Doug's not necessarily a dumb guy, and obviously if they're running it well, he's going to continue to run it. But if they need to throw it and they're behind by 2 touchdowns, well, that's what they're going to do.
You wrote on the website 973ESPN.com about Bruce Arians basically being enamored with Carson Wentz. He compared him to Andrew Luck. He compared him to Ben Roethlisberger. Do you agree with that assessment? And the way that Carson's been playing, has it proven him right?
Well, I think it's early for that. I think there's a bit of hyperbole, but Bruce isn't the first guy to compare Carson to Ben Roethlisberger. I've done it myself. There's a lot of comparables there, and the fact that they're so strong, they're so big, they're able to extend plays. Guys kind of fall off them when they're rushing the passer. So I think that's what he was getting at. And that's just natural to compare young quarterbacks that they remind you of. And I've heard so many now, over 20 games for Carson Wentz. Andrew Luck, as you mentioned, is another. Brett Favre is another. Obviously, you know, guys like Favre and is already in the Hall of Fame. Ben is going to be in the Hall of Fame. So it's tough to say Carson's going to be a Hall of Fame quarterback, but the point of it is he's a really, really good prospect, and he has a really high ceiling as a player. And everything is pointing in a positive direction right now.
I'm talking with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. And I want to get your take on today, Larry Fitzgerald. I mean, this is a guy, and Doug talked about him, but how do the Eagles match up with him? We talk about the secondary. You got Rasul Douglas. He seems to be the bigger physical guy. Do you put a rookie on Larry Fitzgerald, the smaller Jalen Mills? That seems to be one guy that they're going to have their hands full with this week.
Yeah, I mean, you always there's another Hall of Fame player. You always have your hands full when you're dealing with Larry Fitzgerald, and he's kind of morphed as he's gotten older. He plays a lot more in the slot, and that has a lot of guys thinking maybe this will be the week where the Eagles might use Malcolm Jenkins a little bit more in the slot because he wants some size to deal with Larry Fitzgerald. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think Jim only uses Malcolm in the slot when he has to, when he's desperate, and Patrick Robinson is playing so well. I don't think he has to do that right now. So I think people that think that are sort of going down the wrong path. As far as how the Eagles handle them, you know, they're up against it because of the injuries. Now Jalen Watkins is back at practice today. Corey Graham is back at practice. We mentioned Darby already. He's not going to be able to go again this week. So it's a tough matchup, but it's been a tough matchup. And you saw it with Keenan Allen and Terrell Williams and all the explosive plays. You saw it with Odell Beckham. The Eagles got to get through this sort of stretch until Ronald Darby gets back. And to their credit, to this point, they've been finding ways to win football games.
Now, you just said something, you kind of glanced over it, but Corey Graham back, Jalen Watkins also back. So what does that mean for the secondary this week?
Well, I think they feel a lot better with the depth, and if certain things happen, it'll be interesting because Rasul did not play well against the Chargers. Gave up a lot of yardage, gave up a lot of big plays. So it'll be interesting to see if they go back to Jalen Watkins at the cornerback position or they stick with Rasul Douglas. I think that is probably the most interesting part of this game plan. A lot will depend on just how healthy Jalen Watkins is, because there's a difference between being able to practice, being able to play maybe 15 or 20 snaps, and being able to be out there for 60 or 70 if need be. So I think a lot of it depends on health. But I think Jalen was playing well enough before he went down that Jim will probably feel more comfortable with him in there. So I think that's probably the one question you have this week about the lineup.
Hey, I know you talk about Lane Johnson and the offensive line, but overall today, I guess Doug was asked about that left guard situation, and it doesn't seem like they're pulling back from this. This is going to be a rotating position, correct?
Yeah, it is, and I think he pretty much confirmed that today, flat out saying it's going to be the same as it has been. So basically, it's going to be 2-1, somewhere in that range, where Wisniewski's going to get more snaps than Warmack, probably 2 drives to Chance's 1 drive, and they'll keep with that rotation. Doug said it's basically one man's strength is another man's weakness, and I think from the Eagles' philosophy, they think Chance is a better run blocker than Stephen, and Wisniewski's the better pass blocker. I don't know the film necessarily points that out. I think Wisniewski's been better at both, but Warmack's he's got unbelievable size, unbelievable strength, tremendous athleticism, and they're hoping at some point things click for him.
John, you look at this passing game and you see guys like Zach Ertz and Nelson Aguilar really stepping up after kind of disappointing seasons last year. But then you look at the new additions, and Alshon Jeffrey hasn't had that breakout game yet, and Torrey Smith's been struggling. Is it just a matter of time before these two get on the same page and this offense really starts to blossom?
I don't know if that's the case. Certainly with Torrey, I don't think it's the case. I mean, at some point, you got to be realistic and say it was bad in San Francisco last season. And I think there was a lot of excuses made because that was a bad football team and they struggled at the quarterback position and they struggled with the offense as a whole and Chip Kelly. And now we move forward to this year, and it's a better team with a better quarterback situation, and he's still not producing. So at some point, you got to tap out and say, maybe he's not the player we thought he was or he once was. As far as Alshon goes, yeah, I mean, I think ultimately you will see the production start to pile up there. I'm not sure if it's going to be this week because you have Patrick Peterson on the other side, and that's just a bad matchup for just about any receiver in this league. It's going to be difficult against him. But I think ultimately you don't have to worry about Alshon, but I would be very worried about Torrey Smith.
Hey, why do you think Arizona struggled so much? I mean, you just mentioned a couple guys, Peterson, Tyrann Mathieu. I mean, obviously they got some talent there, Larry Fitzgerald. They lost David Johnson. Why is this team struggling so much? And even when they win, they've been ugly wins against some bad teams.
Well, I think it has to do with the theme of the NFL with teams that are struggling. They have a terrible offensive line, and then on top of it, they did lose David Johnson, who is one of the best all-around backs in this league, arguably the second best behind Le'Veon Bell. I mean, he had 1,200 yards rushing last year, and he almost had 900 yards receiving. So he's a big part of their offense, and it's gone, and people know it, and they can't run the football. So people know they're going to throw it, and you have an offensive line that can't pass block. That's going to create problems offensively. And I think that's been their issue to this point. But they're like a lot of NFL teams on a particular Sunday. And we just mentioned some of the players, and we haven't mentioned them all. You talk about Carson Palmer. You talk about Chandler Jones on defense, and Deion Buchanan's going to be back. And even though they lost Marcus Golden, Tyrann Mathieu, as you mentioned, they have a lot of good players. So if they get hot on a particular Sunday, it could be a lot more difficult than you think.
John, you mentioned David Johnson. We were talking earlier before you came on about which guy. We already lost Sproles on the offensive side of the ball. We know, but if there was another skill position player that went down, they can't replace Johnson. Who is the guy on the Eagles, skill position player on the Eagles, they could ill afford to lose now?
Oh, that's a good question. I think you're always. I think it's pretty evident the way they struggle without Lane Johnson. I think you have to look at the other left tackle, Jason Peters. I think you also have to look at Zach Ertz because he's been so important to Carson Wentz as far as being sort of that security blanket when they need to move the sticks. I mean, generally he's going to find Zach Ertz, and Zach's going to be open. So I think those are the two guys I would look at and say there would be really, really difficult problems. Because if you think about Jason, even if you move Lane Johnson to left tackle, which is ultimately what they would do, that means Vaitai your right tackle, and you might have some of the same issues you had last year with when Johnson was suspended.
Right. Let's take a look at the NFL real fast as we get to that middle part of the week. We're at the quarter poll here. Deshaun and I are going to have our quarter poll awards coming up here in about 15 minutes from now. But let me ask a couple of quick questions around this league here. Are you in the Kansas City camp? Are they your best team in the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, you have to be right now. I think this league is pretty much identified. There's no great teams. They're obviously the only undefeated team. And they're just really sound in every aspect. Offense, defense, special teams. They can beat you in a host of ways. So I think right now it's tough to argue that they're not the best team in football. But I don't look at it as a dominant team that you know that's going to be there in the end, because it starts with the quarterback. And as good as he's been, look, they already made their intentions known. They drafted Patrick Mahomes for a reason, and that's because they think Alex Smith has a ceiling.
I'm wondering, do you look at that situation in Kansas City comparable to when Reed drafted Cobb? Like, do you get that similar feeling?
Well,
I know Cobb was a second-round pick.
You know what? I have such immense respect for Andy Reid. I think it comes across on this show, and that's one of the head scratchers to me because I never thought Kevin Cobb could play.
Right.
And I didn't understand Andy's infatuation with him. Whereas I think Patrick Mahomes is a much better prospect. But I don't understand the Alex Smith, I don't want to call it hate. It's not hate, but people who refuse to accept him as a winning quarterback in this league because they expect, I don't know what they expect.
Right.
They expect big plays. They expect Aaron Rodgers. They expect everyone to be like that. And all this guy does is win football games.
Yeah. Well,
and he makes plays.
The whole league, we talked about this yesterday, John, on the show, is the whole league has become – the quarterbacks are all the same guy. I mean, Kirk Cousins and Alex Smith, and there's just so many of them that are good quarterbacks. They're not great. They're not bad. They're just good, and sometimes good is okay. The problem is everybody wants Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady, and there's only two of them. There's more of the other guy.
Yeah, but in Alex's case, I'll even go one farther because I think you're right. I think if you put Kirk Cousins, and he's also a good quarterback, but there's a difference in the fact that the other one wins basically 70% of his games. Now, it is a team sport, and there's other people reaching that goal, but you're talking over two cities now, over two different organizations, because at the end of Alex Smith's run in San Francisco, he was winning game after game after game.
Right. And
now he's doing the same thing in Kansas City. I think that's better than all those other guys, including Kirk Cousins. And then, you know, is he the same kind of pure passer as a player like Cousins? No. But he has the ability to move the chains with his legs, and he seems to do that 2 or 3 times every game in big situations. I don't understand it. This will be the second organization to give up on him And I wrote about it on FanRag Sports earlier this week. He might be the first lame duck MVP candidate in NFL history.
Unbelievable. We play a game during the week called Real or Not Real. I want to play it with you, John, on some of these teams at the quarter pole. I'll ask you the team, real or not real. Buffalo.
Not real. I mean, they're not even trying to win. It tells you the parity of this league, and I think the AFC East has been the strangest division at all because you have two teams who are not trying to win, and the Jets are 2-2, and the Bills are 3-1.
How about Houston?
Houston's real. It depends. Are they a Super Bowl contender? I don't know because I think ultimately Deshaun Watson's going to be like every single rookie quarterback. He's going to make mistakes at times, but he gives that offense an ability for the big play that they haven't had in years, and obviously with that defense, they're going to be in a lot of games. So if he can turn into sort of an Alex Smith type and stay away from turnovers, but bring the big play mentality along with it, all of a sudden, Houston becomes a Super Bowl contender.
Denver.
Denver's real because of that defense, and it's. I thought they might take a little bit of a step back because Wade Phillips obviously left, and Vance Joseph has some cover two tendencies about him, and I didn't think that would have been the right way to go for such an aggressive front and a team with such great cornerbacks. But to his credit, he has not, pounded the square peg in a round hole. He realizes he's got three corners that can cover anybody, and he's letting them play. So Denver's a very good football team.
Detroit, 3-1.
Can I hedge and say in the middle? They're a good team, but you saw last week against Minnesota, Matthew Stafford got sacked 6 times. Dalvin Cook really tears his ACL on the play he fumbles. He fumbled the football because he tore his ACL. The Vikings will probably win the game if he doesn't get hurt. So I think they're a good team, but by no means are they going to be able to compete with Green Bay.
We're looking at some of the NFL teams at the quarter pole. Real or not real, Carolina?
Carolina's real. Are they 15-1? No. Are they 6-10? No. I think the issue with Carolina is Cam Newton and the fact that he didn't have an off season. He was coming off the shoulder surgery. He hasn't been good early on, but you saw him kind of turn the corner against New England. You don't know. New England's defense is so bad, you don't know if that's real or a mirage, but ultimately there's a lot of talent on that team, and I think they'll be a playoff-level team.
Last one, L.A. Rams.
I think they're for real. I really do. Aaron Donald is just a game wrecker. Zach Martin, to me, is maybe the best offensive lineman in football, the Dallas Cowboys guard. Certainly the best interior offensive lineman. And Aaron Donald beat him like a drum time and time again. I've never seen anything like it. He is unbelievable. And then you have Jared Goff. You've got to give Sean McVay a ton of credit. And I talked about it a lot. It shows you just how bad the ecosystem they put around Jared Goff last year was, with Jeff Fisher and Rob Boris and Chris Wenke as his coaches. You compare that to what the Eagles put around Carson Wentz with all the ex-quarterbacks, Doug Peterson, Frank Reich, John DeFilippo. When you take a quarterback that high, the lone goal of your organization is to maximize that quarterback's potential. The Rams did a really bad job the first year. To their credit, they've totally turned it around. And surprisingly, it looks like an NFL quarterback.
All right, there you go. John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Quarter pole of the season. Deshaun and I will have our quarter pole awards coming up on the other side. John will be back tomorrow with more on the Eagles and the Cardinals in the NFL. Thanks, pal.
Hey, thank you, guys.